Let's do this.
Get us started, Paula. What's the topic? Where are we going? Where do you want to open this up with?
GPS. It's all you, Zach. You're the master.
I don't know about the master, but I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of great people who's built some fantastic GPS models. So much so that it inspired me really to start building mine out for my business, right? Into separate parts of my life. I have a personal one and a business one, just to kind of outline how I'm going to reach my goals and what that potentially look like. And where I find teams that are in the mix of just chaos and growth, and there's not a clear path on what the next step is, it generally goes back to the GPS and what our relationship is with it. Because if we have a clear and solid GPS, then it's going to translate into clear directions of what we need to do and what we need to execute. And it's real simple, right? Not easy, but it's simple to go back and say, okay, we had this great GPS. We're now potentially behind goal, or we're succeeding goal. So let's look at the GPS and what areas did we execute on at a high level, and what areas did we have some opportunities where maybe we didn't execute on a high level, and it's causing that gap that we're experiencing now. Because when you have that powerful tool and you're able to implement it, it's really boring to then execute it, right? Because it goes on your GPS, and then we focus on our monthly goals that's going to get us there, and then the weekly activities on our 411 that are deriving those results, right? So ultimately, as we go from months to months, we're not so much focused on the outcomes until the end of the month as much as we're focused on the activities that we're doing weekly that's going to get us there and what we're able to do to accomplish those. So I am a big fan of the GPS. I think there's opportunities across a lot of industries for what that looks like and how it can be used really, and just even our personal lives and what we want to get accomplished.
How many of you are currently using a GPS or have filled one out?
Have one, don't use it at a high level. I think I'm the only one on the team that ever even looks at it.
It's probably true.
We have one, but we mainly do 411s.
And really the GPS should feed into the 411. So if you have your GPS and you're following your 411, they're tied together and you're great with your 411.
Yeah, I would love your guys' feedback. I always look at it as the GPS go to quarterly and see what those results are, and the 411 is your monthly and your weekly, right? The yearly goals reflect what should be on the GPS plus your personal goals, whatever those may be. Then at the end of the day, you could reflect on that GPS quarterly and find out where your gaps are and what may need to change as we head into the next quarter.
I think monthly, if you maybe haven't been on track, but if like you're nailing your 411, quarterly is probably enough. So like Zach obviously would never need to look at his probably till the end of the quarter. I'm probably gonna need to look at mine monthly. If you get off track, you need that constant realignment so that you make sure your new month 411 is, in alignment with. So if like you fell 5 units behind or whatever, you're gonna want to realign for your next month. But if you're tracking, I think quarterly is probably plenty.
And Liz, I think a lot of teams like you is we spend all these times making these GPSs. And so everyone's like, yes, these are our goals. This is our GPS. And then they get busy with the year and nobody goes back and looks at them again. They just keep moving forward.
Yeah. Well, they're not gauging their success based off what they put on there. Right? Which means one or two things. Either it was thrown together, so it wasn't important, or two, we just forgot about it. We don't check it, right? We just don't look at it, which means we don't have a relationship with it, which means we don't have a relationship with our 411, and our 411 is just turned into a task list, not a success list. Like we just got a bunch of random stuff on there. I think there's also, we see or at least I have in my experience, I see a lot of times the GPS is thrown aside because of COVID, would be a great example, right? And I don't know why we don't give ourselves permission to edit and change the plan as we go. And I know this topic came up on our calls. Man, it was probably like a month or two ago. And one of the things I've said is like, your big goals do not change. Like the things I want to accomplish in my personal life that drives my business, which drives the GPS, that does not change. I will always go after that. How I get there, I have no idea what that journey is, right? Like I view it just like a real GPS in a car. There might be road outages. I may need traffic. I don't know what's going to happen. Car may break down. All of that is going to require me to adjust my plan to getting to my goal at the year. So I do think we hit that wall where something isn't working. We're just like, you know what? We're not going to make that goal. And we just throw it aside. And we don't make any of the changes needed to start becoming the person that could achieve that goal.
Yeah.
Or working towards it.
Or strategies not working or priorities to change. Like we stick with it because it's on paper and this is what we said we were going to do, instead of saying, wait a minute, we thought this was going to work and it's not working all the way we thought it would. So how do we need to readjust?
I've got two takeaways for you guys today for the topic of GPS that I was thinking about I wanted to share with you guys. The first would be, and Liz, I think we were talking about this, but the first would be, you know, we're already in September, which some people think is early to be talking about a 2021 GPS. But I'll tell you, when the big teams are doing it these days is actually in April. And was Loken who started to kind of popularize that. And the first time I heard that, I was like, those Lokens, those sons of overeager little achievers. But then, you know, start thinking about it, and it actually made a lot of sense because, you know, he's Lance Loken. So here's why. In April, they write their GPS for the following year because that gives them a quarter to go out and find the talent that's missing, their org model, right? They've got to go build out the missing seats on the bus. Then they follow 30, 60, 90 like the rest of Keller Williams. Well, surprise, that's actually a quarter. So that gives them a quarter to 30, 60, 90, all the people they just onboarded. In Houston, in Texas, Houston, Texas, it's a 90 days activities to results market, which means that the activities you do today will give you results 90 days from now. So what that means is that's another quarter. So that gives you 3 quarters to actually get your 2021 team into full productivity by January 1st, which means they are never like chasing the org model saying, man, we just can't keep up. Like in October, we said we needed 3 people for 2021 and we just never seem to be able to like find and hire them in time to like actually hit our goals. They're never chasing the bus. They're always ahead of the curve. So we're actually, by that logic, May, June, July, August, September, 5 months late to this conversation. Oops, but here we are. The other thing, so that's number one. Number one is we're 5 months late, so we all missed the party. So we need to get back into April having this conversation. Like next year as a community, let's just commit to that. Like let's all of us operations people up our games and say in April, we're going to plan it because we need 3 quarters to prep it. So that's thing number one I wanted to share with you guys. Thing number 2 is I definitely have a preference because it is the 100% only way to GPS. It's not. You can GPS like 100 different ways, but I have a preference. Here it is. I like the MREA. Like I think that's a really smart book. In the MREA, there's 4 models. Wouldn't you know that those 4 models are how we should run our business? It just so happens that one of them, it's called the economic model, helps us think about our conversion rates and like what we actually need to do to get a result. I'm also an operations coach, so I believe in starting with profit. So my my best all-time thing that I could leave you on this call with is go 5 years into the future with your owner and say, what profit do we want to be making 5 years from today? Because everything should start with profit. Let them tell you what that is. They're going to say something, whatever it is. If 5 years is still too close, you could even take them out 10 years. The idea is just to get them like someday, what profit do you want to be taking? Tell them how much of that, like ask how much are you taking home? Because you can't, like if the owner's profit goal is $500,000 and the team makes $500,000, then they would be bankrupting the team if you only set a goal to make $500,000. Does that make sense? So talk to them about, what's your draw on that? Like what would we actually be making? Figure out the team's profit 5 years from today. Go ahead and write your economic model starting in year 2025, and then back it back from 2025, 24, 23, 22, 21 into what next year would be. Now, that's the science. The art is to go back through that now and see what sort of gymnastics you had to do that. I don't recommend as an ops coach more than a 20% unit growth year over year. So if you're backing it out and you're 20%, what's really cool is you'll start to see in your team numbers where you'll have a hockey stick year. And what I mean is that growth curve where you're like slow growth, and then you have this crazy growth. Because if you back it out 20% units, but you're also in your economic model improving your conversion rates, your cost of sales, and your expense structure to get to like your ideal someday, then what you'll figure out is you'll be backing out by the units, and you'll actually have a crazy income increase by doing that. So you'll hit that, you'll be able to actually see the future where your hockey puck growth curve will be, which is really cool. Now, because this is not supposed to be a class in theoretical business practices, let's just pull up real quick what a business model, screen share one with you, an example of an economic model like this could look like. Oh, Paula, I can't share my screen.
Oh, sorry.
Just kidding. Paula's gonna let me
Now,
share the screen. Cool. Go back. Okay. Let me pull this out. Chevy's trying to sell me some cars or something. They think I might like to drive that in the desert. They don't know me at all. Okay, so let's take a look. Now, what's so cool about this, other than all of the cool things I've already told you about this, is that this is only model one. Once we can see our economic model for 5 years, it actually tells us what's missing in our org model for those 5 years, our budget model for those 5 years, and even our lead generation model for those 5 years. So by doing the by starting with profit, filling out 5 years of economic modeling, then you actually already know exactly what you need to do to be on model in all of the other areas. And that is how you write your GPS. So watch this. I'm going to walk you through this, but first take a look at the yellow. Everything in yellow is a lever you can pull on the GPS. So this is just a system. Write your economic model. Everything in yellow is a lever for your GPS. It also is where the other models come in. So in this team's ideal year 2025, they want the net income to be 720, and they want to sit at a net income as percent of GCI, 36%, 32 expense and cost of sale. So there's no judgment here. Maybe you want to be a 30-30-40 team. Maybe you want to be a 20-30 whatever. Like, just figure out ideally what would it be. Now this is going to tell you expenses, cost of sale, and GCI in real dollars. But again, we're only changing the yellow cells. So in this team, we're going to have 60% sellers, 40% buyers, and you can see their ideal average commission, their average sales price, so pretty low, military town, and then their conversion rates, what they would be, and it's going to spit out their total number of units. Now she's got a 21% in this model, 21% unit growth year over year, up until the hockey puck year. So I'll show you that year too. So here she is in year 2024. They're walking into the future, except she's gone backwards, right? So here's they've made some minor adjustments in their income percentages to walk into that model they're trying to hit, as well as their conversion rates, et cetera. So we've got 346 units in 2024.
Megan, real quick.
2023.
Megan?
Yeah.
Real quick. You guys,
yeah.
all this whole formula and everything is on page 131 of MREA. So if you're like, oh, I want to take this and I want to plug in numbers, that's where it is, page 131. Okay, keep going.
Beautiful. So here she's walking back still, right? Because this is a journey from where they are to where they want to be. So these numbers are changing year over year. So like in this year, they're 55% instead of 60% sellers. So this is a walk. So another 21% growth here in units of 285. 2022. Again, she's journeying through, so they're still at 50-50 here, split. They're already beating this average sales price and this average commission, by the way, which is why they don't walk anywhere, because they're already beating it. So this is actually adjusting for if it went down a little bit. It's a very conservative adjustment. 235 units. Now, she was walking this back 20% of GCI, 21% of GCI year over year. I think I said units earlier, I apologize. It was GCI, 21% of GCI. Now look what happens when she walked it back 20% of GCI year over year. You can literally see the hockey puck year. Here they are in 2022, closing 235, but what were they gonna close in 2021, 237, and then a 20% growth in GCI, improving their conversion rates alone, because that's what happened in this year for them. They have a hockey puck growth year. So they're definitely gonna see a huge increase here, because 21% increase in GCI is already modeled in just by conversion rate increases. Their units are not gonna go backwards by 2 if they improve their conversion rates. Instead, they'll have a hockey puck year. So they'll have, maybe instead of 20% growth, they'll have 40% growth in this year. So this is your crystal ball when you get your econ models going for you. Now check out, so she can go back and massage this, by the way. She's had that 20% growth year over year from GCI, but now she can go, this is the art of the science, and say, we're not gonna go backwards by 2 units. So if we actually went forward, even though it's gonna be more than a 20% GCI growth, what would be possible here, which is gonna put them on a new growth curve for 23, 24, and 25. It means that she'll probably hit her 2025 goals in like 2023 when she makes that adjustment. So check this out. We've got all these levers to pull. In 2020, this is her reality. So this is where they're walking from to where they're walking to. She's gonna pull the lever of net income, expense, and cost of sale. What model is that? It's a budget model. Right? So here's our budget model. She's going to pull those levers. That's a GPS-able thing. She's going to pull these economic model levers, which are conversion rates, which tell us then what we need to do with our lead gen, right? How are we going to convert our METs or haven't METs in order to increase conversion rates in these categories? What education do we need, et cetera? So that's our lead gen model. And it's going to tell us in our units who's missing. Because if you're going to go from 151 units and walk this journey all the way up to 400 something units, there's some missing people on the bus. So this will also help us address our org model, which we can then take to our GPS and say, you know what, to go from 2020, 151 units to 2021, 37 units, what people are we missing on the bus? What education, what different lead sources do we need in order to correct our conversion rates? If she did have a sales price or an average commission goal, we could also address that on the GPS, right? How are we going to increase our average sales price or increase our commission piece? How are we going to go from 40 to 45% sellers? So increase our seller leads as a percent of the pie. And then what are we going to do in our budget model to get a 2% higher net income?
Yeah. Most of the teams even I worked with have a setup like that. Now, one of the things, it's not really different. One of the things I would suggest on the one that I've seen Builder that I've used too, it actually had the economic model built in it. Like all of them. I'll show you here, all 4 models. So if you look, you guys able to see my screen?
Yeah. Nice.
Perfect. So this is exactly what Megan's talking about, which I love so much. You still can build it out 5, but what was helpful for me, and I'm just giving you a different perspective to look, is this has the business plan, economic model based exactly off of what Megan's sharing, lead generation model based on what leads are you going to need based off the conversions that are in MREA, budget model based on the GCI, how we create a healthy business, based off of then your organizational model and who you're missing to execute. on that.
Love it.
And when you have, so it's a different perspective, and yet you still could build this out 5 years and have it to where you know exactly like Megan's saying to build out your GPS. And all of those, as Paula pointed out, can be found in the MREA.
And that's your pre-work. Like people who sit down and say, oh, we're going to build a GPS. And I say, oh, where are you going 5 years from now? And they say, well, we don't know. I think, what are you going to build? Like you're just guessing at where you kind of want to go next year. You gotta start with the end in mind, and everything else is easier. Then every April, when you sit down to do your next GPS, you pull out your 5-year econ model, make any adjustments, and you already know what levers you intend to pull and how to write it. You just gotta put it into a plan.
And it's not a right or wrong. I have a preference on the GPS too. I actually prefer that it's built leads, listings, leverage, which is specifically pulled off of the MREA. Now listings, you could almost do like sellers/buyers and what the strategies are going to be around those. But I prefer to stay in that realm because we get creative and it starts getting off the path and it doesn't get to the core of the fact that we need to get the listings based off of the lead generation model, right? That's going to propel us into the listing and buyers that we need, which is then going to tell us the hires we need to make from the administrative side and or admin. Do you guys have a preference on the way you've done it or the way you've looked at it before?
Well, Liz was the only one who kind of raised her hand.
Yeah. Well, how about you guys, Megan, Paula? You guys, when you were on teams before, did you ever do it differently or a different way?
I did it the way I just described. 5-year econ model. Mine looks really different than this. I could show you what it looked like. It was massive, but it spoke to all of the models. It was a 5-year build out. And then we just went back to, okay, what year is it next?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not talking about, that's for the goal, but I'm talking about the actual priorities within the GPS.
I built it based off the levers to pull off of our, like what we were just talking about. So it might be, so if we were missing, 10 people, then one goal would be that, or if our economic model, like we needed to make a huge conversion leap, then one of the priorities was going to be conversion increase. I usually looked at it just like personally, again, there's a million ways to write your GPS. So take this for like one team's version. But I personally looked at it as, okay, like if we're gonna have a unit leap, like to get us to our profit goal. So let's say we wanted to leap by 50 units. Then I would ask myself the Jeff Woods question, which was, what if my first priority could get us those 50 units? And I would say, okay, if my first priority is going to get those 50 units and I'm going to hire the missing agents, then how many agents do I need to get 50? And I would completely live my life like that was all in on that. My second priority would be like, what if I didn't hire any agents and I got to 50 more units just by increasing conversion rates? And I'd go all in on that plan so that I actually had a plan that if I only ended up doing one fully would get me the results, so that I'd actually go further than my goal, if that makes sense. And then I'd always bring back in ops, like if I was missing ops people, and then the budget model. So what was I doing to move like if I need to bring down cost of sales or whatever, what lever was I pulling in my budget model? So that was me personally, but it usually centered around how am I going to get to units, and it was a hiring and a economic model goal.
Got it. Makes sense.
And Zach, when you think about it, everything she said falls into leads, listings, and leverage, and yet she's not necessarily doing them in that order. Like it might be leverage first, like you said, you need to hire those agents, and then you go to listings, let's work on conversion rates.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so conversion rates, the levers under that we would pull would be lead source, like if we wanted to get a higher like lead to closed rate, or a shorter bell curve, like ours was 9 months from lead entering our system to closing was the top of our bell curve for non-Mets, or a better conversion rate on our Mets. Like those would be the strategies under that priority, but it was usually like higher conversion rates and then budget, like whatever budgeting model was left over. Just me personally, but again, that might not be, if you're at a place where you're like just bringing on a TC or something, like you're probably not looking at like, how do I get 100 more units next year?
Yep.
So I have curiosity question. How many of you, if you went to your Rainmaker today and said where you want to be in 5 years, they could give you an answer of any kind?
I know Joey, at least my Rainmaker, he's working on his 3-year plan as we speak. I know he has a general idea of what 5 years look like, but I know he has written down 3 years.
Yeah. And what they tend not to be good at is, they're great thinking big picture. What they tend not to be good at is bringing it down to the fine detail, which is where we come in. Right?
Spreadsheet.
We can take that big dream and we can break it down into the pieces.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, if you've heard anything, is build a template to track this so we can start quantifying the dream, right? So it's not just a number. We can put some math behind it that shows how we get there.
So my Rainmaker, his big goal is to be out of production.
So what does the
So-
income need to be for him to be out of production?
That's the question that he doesn't have the answer to. Like, what do we need to be doing profit wise? What do we need to who do we need to have in place org wise? The answer is just let me think about it.
So if I guess my next question to him would be, if you are making the same income you are today and you were out of production, would that be what you wanted? Because if that is the answer, then working that all backwards is easy. Now, if he says, no, I want to be making double what I'm making now, then that gives you your profit there. You need to know that he can walk away with that profit. And so then you work the numbers backwards.
Yeah, I think having a template, right, of a system that you can input this information into, then it makes it easier for us to kind of navigate that. And even if the number change, we can very quickly then redevelop it, figure out what we need to do, right, in that 5-year goal.
Yeah, I'll show you guys one of the things that you can see kind of what Paul is talking about. Like, I got a spreadsheet that I think will help you see this. Can you see this? It says 5-year plan, 2 million passive income. Can you see that? Are we looking at the same thing?
Yep.
Awesome. Awesome. So like what Paul's saying is, like, in the simple version we were looking at before, it just says profit. But here, if you look at, there's a breakdown between owner draw as a percent of GCI and GCI retained for growth. Combined, those are profit. So that's 35%. But if you're just looking at, like, what does the owner need to take? Like, that's where, like, just start there and put in an actual dollar number. So down here in the, you could, I have this one by percentages, but you could also do it by dollar, where the key piece of the cornerstone of your spreadsheet might be this actual dollar figure. Like if he says, $200,000, or in this case, they wanted over 2.5 million. Then if that's the cornerstone, then everything else just falls from there. So in this case, the owner's only taking 5% because we needed 15% in the retained for growth. Otherwise you bankrupt your company. Like, the owner can't draw 100% year over year. That doesn't work. But that leaves you all the, you can do, like, who do you need? How would we get there? As a DOO, you can say that. Like I've yet to meet a Rainmaker who knew the answers to that. But if you said, okay, just tell me what you want to make, and then you did the rest of this and you said, great, here's the formula for how many account managers we're going to need. It's just going to spit it out. Here's the formula for how many agents we're going to need based on our assumptions. It's going to spit it out. Here's the cost of sale we'll never violate. Like, here's a salary study predicting what those positions will cost overhead year over year, like accounting for growth in the economy. Like, what if you did that and then you just said, here it is, like, here's the plan. It's going to take me 3 years, 4 years, 5 years to get you there, whatever it is. All I need to know from you is this number.
Yeah, and a great resource to learn more about that is Profit First. Would be a great resource for you guys to read through. It is its own model and system. And yet, even if you don't truly follow it, there's some really great information in there, right? And part of that information and what's in there is they talk about TAPS, which is your target allocation percentages, right? Like what percentage is going there. And that's what both Megan and Paula is referring to, is what is that target percentage we need to pull so the owner can draw from the business. So there should be a certain percentage for growth and a certain percentage, right, for the owner withdrawal, take home.
Yeah.
But that's a great book. If you read it, or library, just read even that chapter around TAPS is really good.
I need my 3 o'clock snack, y'all.
So did you guys have any questions today on the GPS? I know Marissa.
What did
haven't really been there yet.
No, I just need to take all that in.
What did you come today hoping that you were going to hear? Like, what made you show up today?
We just actually went over this in our latest coaching call. So kind of just reinforcing all of it, just information. So that's really great. Thank you. Sorry, I have to mute myself again.
What about the rest of you guys? What did you come today hoping you would hear? Like, what drove you to our call?
Kind of the same idea. You know, Zach and I are currently working on a shorter term goal plan right now for me for like the rest of the year. So, you know, kind of the same idea, working with those dominoes, like what do we have to start with first to get to our end goal? And so I think, you know, listening to this is really helpful because hearing it on a bigger scale, on a bigger level, you know, kind of makes what I'm trying to do right now in the shorter term make more sense. And then, you know, can help me achieve my goals for the next year or so. I guess the one question that I do have for you all is just, I mean, so like my rainmaker, he's the one who's, you know, in charge of the GPS for our team. Is that something, is the GPS something like on the operations side that you also suggest having like a separate one, like one for, you know, all the financials and all that stuff, like how many, you know, properties we have to hit to get the money and the income and all that, but also one, you know, what's the goal of the team and operation wise? You know, I know we're growing our team. So is that something that we should also think to be doing?
Rachel, that's a really, really good question. Zach, you want to field that one?
Yeah, well, I think, so I want a definition real quick. So tell me about the operations of it. Do you mean specifically just your role and the potential hires you're making? Are you referring to the whole team?
Well, I understand, like, you know, for me would be like a personal one. Like I get that, but I guess, yeah, what I'm talking about is like for the entire team and like what that would look like for, you know, like you guys were saying, like start with 2025 and go backwards. So like kind of the same thing here. Is that something, you know, what do we want our team to look like by 2025 and how we get to that point?
Yes. So is using those models that Megan is shared with us, right? The economic model, which then is going to tell you and allow you to make the next hire, which is your organizational model. So if you follow that path, and if I'm following what you're asking, is the GPS we just discussed is for the whole team. It's not just for your rainmaker.
Okay.
Yeah, it's for, that is for the whole entire team. Now, as you move into, in your case, it's growing into a director of operations role because you really, you have to make some hires right now to where you're at. So then you may have a operations GPS based off of the economic model where you see yourself. That would involve the making a certain number of hires. Maybe the team gets a certain number of referrals, reviews. What is the benchmarks that could go into that gets you into the next level and supports the team GPS?
Got it. Got it. That makes sense.
Right now, in some cases, you may not need a separate one depending on where you're at in your team. The team one, based off the economic model and hires that you need, may be all included just on that main team GPS. And there may be no need for a second one. It covers what you need to do. Your portion of it goes over into your 411. Did that answer your question?
With what Zach's saying, a lot of it depends on the size of your team. So these really big teams, they have a team GPS, but then each department has a GPS and that GPS feeds into the team GPS because they are of such size now. So it really is dependent on the size of the team. So Rachel, know that too, as you grow, that may change. So what works today may not work in 3 years. You may change it up.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, I definitely understand that and have learned that it is, all of these are ever changing and always a transition and work in progress.
I think as we work through the strategies, it's also very important to note that when you start focusing on this, that we're really specific about assigning those strategies to a person. That person may not be the only one executing that particular strategy, and yet we should have one person assigned to it who's responsible for reporting the results of it and holding people accountable to getting it.
Yeah, you need an owner of it. Otherwise, everybody thinks somebody else is the owner and it gets lost.
Excellent point.
So you have your priorities decided by the team. As Megan said, each priority should support the goal, right? If you do that priority, but we execute the priorities before we move on to the next one. And then within that, you'll have teams that will say, well, I think this would be a great strategy, and you agree upon it. And then the very next question out of our mouths should be, who's going to own it? Right? Who's responsible for owning that piece of it? And that changes a lot too, Rachel, dependent on who's on the team, right? For like you and Joey, your names may be on a lot of it, or a good portion of it. And then as we grow and our teams get bigger, then we start to leverage some of those off, right? Where now we're not managing it all the way down through. Someone else has that responsibility, which is an awesome
on our
growth.
current annual goals. It's like a lot of the owners are me and him, so I understand that, and eventually those will be moved to other people. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I use you as your example in your team?
Sure.
Okay. So this is actually a great example when we go through here of the way that this could show up. So as you heard, it is Rachel, her Rainmaker, Joey, and then a lot of the bulk of the GPS is on there. But some of our conversation piece that we had is, how do you empower the VA to start taking over ownership of being a lead VA, virtual assistant, right? That's a tremendous growth opportunity. So that's something where part of that growth, or if you're developing a leader, a GPS strategy is a great place to start, because we could assign that particular person a strategy and tell them their ownership of it, right? And a report to you. And that's a great thing to start helping them empower that transition, because now they own something to where you're asking them, what is the result of this? And what are we doing to execute on it at a high level? Which also can be done with members of your team. Don't think they have to be in leadership to take over that strategy, right? So if someone says like, hey, I want your role one day, a great opportunity is to assign them a strategy from the GPS that they own and see how they run with it. How do they do with it? That can actually develop a whole new series and path, right? Because now they may not know how to do that, or they may have challenges, and that allows us as leaders, managers manage systems, leaders lead people, right? So now we can go, well, what does your growth plan look like that supports you and learning how to execute this at a high level or change what we're currently doing to execute it. So a lot of good stuff can come from doing that. What are thoughts or questions do we have?
Liz is thinking deep thoughts over there. I can see it in her face.
I guess one question I have is, how do we hold our rainmakers accountable to things that are on the GPS assigned to them? And is it our responsibility to hold them accountable, or is that the responsibility of their coach?
Great question. I believe that all of us in our position have a duty to lead from below. And it is the coach's responsibility also, and it is ours. And Liz, that's not always easy, as we've all experienced.
Yeah.
When is it the hardest though? Like, Liz, why don't you just tell us, when is it the hardest? Like, think of Liz's situation she just described, right? Like a rainmaker who doesn't know what they want someday. Do they know what they want today? No. Do they know what they want someday? No. Like, how can you write a roadmap for that? How committed are they to the GPS when it doesn't describe what they want? And it's not that Liz wrote it on purpose to like describe something he doesn't want, but if he doesn't know, like if he's struggling to get clarity, do you think he's going to be committed to that roadmap when it's taking him somewhere he's not sure he wants to go?
And this is the same question we've had about agents on the team, is unless you know their why, none of it means anything. It's a number, it's a piece of paper, it's something written on a piece of paper. Like, they have to emotionally be bought in to the journey and where they're going to get there.
Yeah. That's why step one is ask them, like 5 years from today, what do you want? Because you could throw a number, you could say like, well, $1 million. Like, but if that doesn't mean anything to them, it doesn't mean anything to them. And it's infinitely harder. Like, you end up with a rainmaker who's not going to follow the business plan because it doesn't mean anything.
Well, and that's where I always like the accountability piece of it and around that. And whether you do it monthly or quarterly like what I was discussing, is if you have a group meeting quarterly around the GPS performance and we have ownership assigned to those strategies, you will execute at a higher level. And a lot of times, I mean, yeah, we got to know their why, but the pressure of having to present when you know you're owner of that strategy to the group of how did we do? What do we need to do differently in this next quarter? Can also be powerful, right? And that's not just for the rainmaker, it's for all of us to have that accountability that we know when we bring it together, we were owner of this strategy that was to get us to goal.
True. And if you have three people stepping up that own a strategy and they're all coming in and reporting, and everybody's reporting that they've achieved their strategy and the rainmaker's not, that sends a message too.
Mm-hmm.
No easy answer on that one.
It's not.
Some of it, I think, too, starts with when we built the GPS. Did we have a one-on-one conversation with the rainmaker, and did we have the confidence to push back in a professional way? Or did we assign things to the rainmaker because we felt the rainmaker should do them? And that happens a lot too, right? Like, we just have people to be like, yep, yeah, like I'll do it, or put my name on there. When the thing of it is sometimes it can really be beneficial if we step up and we ask the question, are you going to do that? Or do you want to do that? Or do we need to figure out a different way to do it? right? And then let's figure that out. And then you can, again, go back to the economic model, the 4 models within there, and figure out what that could look like if they don't want to do it. I had an example that I had a rainmaker who had agreed to lead gen 2 hours a day, which was MREA standard, right? So you want to applaud. And the team was getting upset with him because he wasn't doing it. And yet he still was the leading salesperson on the team. He still had the most contracts. And the simple question was like, why did you agree to that? It's your team. It's your why. Like, the standards could be set to whatever you feel they should be set to, right? And then we bring people into our world that execute that. So I think there's a healthy dose of that too on that GPS. Did we ask, like, are you willing to do that, or what do you really want to do?
Yeah, so many agents tell you what you want to hear instead of being honest. And it's even being honest with themselves. Like, they have heard something over and over and they feel obligated to give that answer and to do that activity. And yet that's not what they feel inside. And
Not in every case. In this case, oh, go ahead, Paul.
I was going to say, and when they've had success by not doing what best practices are, there's nothing wrong with that. They've had success. Embrace it.
Yeah, I was going to follow up. I mean, it was liberating for this particular rainmaker because he went back and he set the expectations. And basically the expectations were, it's like, look, I'm committed to doing this and this is what I'm going to do, but you guys committed to doing this and this was the plan.
Yeah.
Right? Ownership. Do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
But we hear that a lot.
That goes back to the conversation about standards. Like, is your standard to lead gen for 2 hours a day? Or sometimes our rainmaker will say, you know, you set an appointment, go to the beach if you want. Like, what is the ultimate goal? Is the ultimate goal the time block, or is the ultimate goal the result of the appointment set?
Yeah. And this is the battle with that too, because ultimately it should be the result. And yet, are they willing to do whatever they need to do to hit that result? If their result is 1 appointment a day, are they willing to do whatever they need to do to get 1 appointment a day? And that's where we fall into the lead gen. However, when we focus on the activity and not the result, then the activity happens and a lot of times the result doesn't happen. And if you focus on the results, a lot of times the results happen with less activity. It's a constant. I struggled with this scenario with my team all the time. It was that standard of lead gen, yet we always needed to focus on the result. Because you could make 100 calls a week and never set an appointment because you're not focused on the appointment. Where if you're focused on the result, you might do that in 50 calls.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you can have both. Look, we've talked about this before. I forget which call it was, but you can have both where you could, like, both can be simultaneously true. So you could say, like, we are a team that lead gens for 2 hours every day. That's the standard. Like, you are, if you are on the team, you are lead genning for 2 hours every day. The goal of the lead gen for 2 hours every day is to set an appointment every day. When you set an appointment, you can go. So it doesn't have to be this or that, right? So if you start at 8 and you set your first appointment at 8:05, now your goal for the week is 5 appointments. So you got to show up tomorrow and do it at 8 again. Or you could say today and try and get a second or a third. But you can build in some flexibility as long as you are upfront about what that is. And everyone has the same opportunities, right? So if it's an appointment a day, 2 hours of lead gen, you can have both.
Agreed.
We have 5 minutes left. Anybody have something we can handle in only 5 minutes?
I guess another question I have is, how much should we be responsible for putting together the GPS and how much should the rainmaker? Because I kind of feel like I put together the GPS and then he just kind of glances at it and okay, that works. Like how do I go from putting together the GPS and really getting his buy-in on it? I guess maybe that's the ultimate question.
It's a great question. Did you have a planning meeting with the entire team?
Yeah.
Is it his goal? That's my
Yes.
question.
Yeah, it's his goal.
Is it though? Because we just spent like 20 minutes talking about how he doesn't really have one.
It's his goal for this year. It's maybe not based on a 5-year plan. However, it is what, like, I think what he would say is a successful year if it was achieved.
And why is that his goal?
So the goal is $120,000 in reserves because it's 6 months of expenses, and that's what Gary says you should have.
And why is that important to him?
Because we've been in situations where we barely have the money to pay expenses and doesn't want to be there again. So, I mean, and that's a good point that maybe he hasn't spent enough time actually considering what he wants and why he wants it. And I need to get more clarity there.
Yeah. And I think having the team, you can, this was just my own personal thing. I would kind of have an idea of what I thought it could look like, but then you still bringing it up to the team and having their buy-in and what they're committed to doing, what they're looking at is extremely helpful.
And the other thing, Liz, that popped into my head as you were saying that, his goal is out of pain. It's not out of pleasure. So my first thought is, how can we get him to a goal that's out of pleasure?
Yeah.
So how is the goal going to feed into him having a better life?
And I think that's where if I can get clarity on what his 3 or 5 year plan is, and then build 2021's GPS based off of getting us towards that, then yeah, maybe he will have more buy-in.
Yeah. Like, how many kids does he want to have in his house? Like, how many more foster kids is that? Like, how much does that cost? That's not cheap. I mean, to take on kids like that. And what would that look like if he had an extra 100,000? How would he change their lives even more? Like, maybe like lean into that super raw spot for him right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Figure out, because the other thing too is he said that he wants to create like 2 net worth millionaires in his circle. So like, what is that going to cost us? How does that look? And does that play into the GPS as well?
And why is that important to him? Like, what's important about creating 2 millionaires?
Yeah.
Ultimately, Liz, it has
Megan, it always comes back to start with why.
Start with why. I have it somewhere here.
Ultimately, it has to be an answer really all about him. And that's not, like, we all don't want to be selfish, and yet when it comes to what motivates us, it's all about us. So it needs to be all about him.
Yeah. Well, my business caveat is it all does start with why, and yet I always add in it's quantifying the why. Because a business can't run off a qualitative feeling of why. It has to be quantified to a number. So that's why I like, it can't be adopt certain number of foster kids. It needs to be, what is the cost? What does my business need to do to support that, right? So there is a why, which is qualitative and great, but it's important to quantify that stuff. And by the way, same thing with your personal goals.
Is the quantification.
Yeah. Exactly. You gotta get to the emotional goal, right, Zach? And then you quantify that emotional goal. Like
Yeah.
if his emotional goal is he wants to help 20 kids have better lives, like that, he wants to help 20 kids get better lives. That's his emotional goal. And then you can quantify that emotional goal with how much money do you need to take care of 20 kids, make 20 kids' lives better.
Right. Yeah, and that's no different than us, by the way, as leaders. Like if you look at your 5-year, where you want to be at, are you fitting your life inside the current business and where you see that projection? Or are you building the business and your career to fit, right, to push your personal world?
I love that.
Because that's what's impactful even about the 411 too.
Yeah. If you don't know where you want to be 5 years, if you don't know what you want out of life, how can you expect your rainmaker to know that? And how do you expect to go there with him if you don't know yourself?
Yeah, we have conversations. I know we're running a little over on time, but we have conversations like this all the time, right? Like, well, what do you want to do next year? What's your goal? Well, I think I'm going to ask for a raise, and it's backwards. Like, okay, that's great. Like, you probably deserve one. In a lot of our cases, we deserve one. And yet what's really important about it is what do you actually want to do? Maybe it is take those 2 vacations. Let's quantify it. Maybe it is adopt kids. Maybe it is to buy a house, right? Then what is that quantified? And then what business do we need to create so you can do all of that fun stuff? Which then now you can go in with a plan to your rainmaker and say, this is what I'm looking to do, build and grow because I want to do this.
Yeah.
Love that. All right, gang, I got to jump to my next call. Such a pleasure to be with you today. See you at Mega Camp.
Thank you all.
Thanks.